past the hills and rivers wide, where wildflowers freely bloom. In this land with skies so open, where can our children play? In cities bustling bright and loud, cars and lights that never sleep, do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Mountains whisper ancient tales, forests sing in harmony. Will these wonders slip away? Where can our children play? Beyond the screens and towers tall, where dreams once were born and bred, do they carve new paths of joy? Where can our children play? Let's be stewards of this earth, guard the spaces wide and free. Do they find a piece of sky? Where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play?
Again, some recent situations that I've had the opportunity to be involved in was I was looking at, they asked me to look at a greenhouse operation in Alaska. Beautiful operation, a high tunnel greenhouse, producing tomatoes for most of the local grocery stores, and he said, well, my yields are twice what they used to be, and I can't understand why, because I'm doing everything the same. And got in there, but he said, I'm concerned that when they inspect me, they're going to accuse me of applying some growth stimulants or something, and I'm all organic. Well, when we looked at it, and you had all of the symptoms on the leaves of the epinasty as though it was a phenolic exposure. But in his situation, it was coming from composting the yard waste that he was picking up as an organic fertilizer for those tomato plants in the greenhouse. And they had enough of the phenolic herbicide, don't know which one, whether it's 2,4-D or that it was stimulating, or a metabolite from the breakdown products, and oleacetic acid was stimulating the plant, so that rather than having just one branch coming down with the 2 tomatoes stacked all the way down that branch, he had 3 and 4 branches coming off, and each one of them had that. Now, from that standpoint, it would be a positive, but from an organic, it would be frowned upon. Lethal lentils at a company, actually 480 acres of lentils, where they were trying to shoot for an increased yield and production efficiency. They had analyzed all of the plant from the first month of growth on up, got up to flowering, and they knew what those nutrients needed to be for each additional bushel of lentils that they were producing, and thought that they were really on track. They had gone from 26 bushel to 56 bushel by getting that nutrition available at the proper time. They put out what there in June 16th. It showed that they were short on phosphorus. In order to move it up to the next level of yield, and they were really shooting for 70 bushel. And so they went out in the next couple of days and applied an orthophosphate that's very readily taken up by the foliage of the plant and moves throughout the plant. Very essential element from an energy and physiology standpoint. So that they made this application, expected it to just really flourish and take off to give them that extra 5 to 20 bushel increase in yield. 3 days, the plants went from a nice, pretty green color to a light green color, and in 10 days, the plants were dead. And they said, well, what'd we do wrong? And they didn't do anything wrong. They did everything right. It's exactly how you would do it to increase your yields. But they forgot about the elephant in the room that was the residual glyphosate in the soil. And the glyphosate and phosphorus have the same binding site in soil. Glyphosate in those clay soils doesn't degrade. So they've got 25 or 30 years of accumulated glyphosate sitting in the soil. When they put the phosphate fertilizer on the plant, moves down, moves out in the root system, into the soil, desorbs the residual glyphosate, and killed the plant in 10 days. So rather than harvesting 56 bushel or 70 bushel, they harvested 7 for 480 acres. Had that one, again, about a $900,000 lawsuit for a lost crop from following the recommendation of the consultant. They spent $13,000 trying to analyze for everything they could think of, and everything proved to be negative. There are 200 pesticide list tests that is typically done, but it doesn't test for glyphosate. So when they called me and I said, well, what's your glyphosate level? And they explained the phosphorus trigger effect on it. They said, we don't know, we got the 200, but glyphosate isn't analyzed in that. Did an analysis, and 691 parts per million, or parts per billion glyphosate in the soil, and 570 or so in the tissue in the stubble of the lentils. And so what they missed was the elephant in the room in that capacity, that because of the glyphosate just accumulating. There's an article that just came out 2 or 3 weeks ago stating, be careful using chicken manure in your organic tomatoes because they can have enough glyphosate to destroy your crop. And they demonstrated that. We had a paper that I was involved in with 4 or 5 other scientists. We just published 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's open source, so that if you go to Hort Science, you can pull that up. I can send Laurie the links to the articles if you want. But we had the food company, sauerkraut company, that makes about 80% of all the sauerkraut in North America, commented that they were in a disaster situation where, because they had lost $1 million worth of sauerkraut, rather than that white, crisp sauerkraut with flavor and that like you taste, when they opened the vats, it was more like applesauce. Well, if you want mush, you usually go to oatmeal, but not mushy sauerkraut. And so the title of the paper is Saga of Soggy Sauerkraut. It was only occurring on their organic, not on their conventional, and the only difference between those two was the use of their fertilizer. And the fertilizer that they were using, since the company had expanded their production dramatically, they couldn't find enough organic manure from animals that were under organic production to meet their needs, and they got permission to use some inorganic or some conventionally grown poultry, the manure from them. And when we analyzed that, it was very high in glyphosate. In fact, about 580 or 90 parts per billion. Well, 500 is a full herbicidal dose of glyphosate. And so when we looked at those, what was happening was that the glyphosate in the manure that was used as the fertilizer for the organic cabbage chelates and ties up your micronutrients, especially manganese, copper, and zinc. Well, manganese, copper, and zinc are required for secondary cell wall formation for the sauerkraut, which wasn't there, and so it didn't have the structural integrity then that, so it mushed down and the company lost the product. And $1 million loss to the company in that process. Easy to correct by cleaning up the manure. And you say, when we went to the poultry producers, we asked if we could do some studies with their poultry on the feed and use some raw sauerkraut juice, which degrades glyphosate. That's the Lactobacillus plantarum organism. And they had no interest at all, even though Ted Dupemeyer, veterinarian in Canada, has shown that at those levels of glyphosate that we were finding, his poultry producers are losing 20 to 30 animals a week. And yet they had no interest in changing. They just said, no, everybody has these losses, nothing we can do about it. Well, you can do it. Start out with some clean feed to start with is the first thing. But the soggy sauerkraut, if you're interested, I'll get those there. These are what the tomatoes look like with the control tomatoes, and you can see that they still have exposure to glyphosate, but your glyphosate from the manure, so they have other sources of glyphosate besides just the manure, and it's probably their water that they're using. This is the lentils again. You can see as we went through there, rather than 70 bushel or 56 even, they harvested 7 bushel. And it's that elephant in the room that we're not really paying attention to because people aren't analyzing for glyphosate. And what we found then in the studies, this is Australian farm soils, CSIRO's data. You can see that as you increase the clay content in the soil, that you also have very little degradation, and they followed it to the AMPA, but not even a whole lot going to the AMPA when you have higher clay content in that. And you can see the effective glyphosate levels. This is probably a 30-year level of glyphosate there. Food contaminating pesticides, the ones that we have the highest exposure to are listed here. And you look at glyphosate and you see all of those health problems, and those are all items where we're reaching the epidemic standpoint. About 80, a factor of 80 on glyphosate on a scale of 100. Chlorpyrifos will be the second most toxic material. An insecticide, organic phosphate again, is down about 20. Glyphosate, again, is a very strong mineral chelator to tie up our essential minerals. It's a synthetic amino acid, marketed, and it was first developed as a mineral chelator to clean boilers. Patented 10 years later in 1974 as an herbicide, and in 2000, 2002 it was patented as an antibiotic. If you have a development of resistance to glyphosate from an antibiotic standpoint, every test that's been done now shows that it's resistant to all of our other antibiotics. So we have half a billion pounds of glyphosate indiscriminately spread throughout the environment as a very potent antibiotic, and we're wondering why we have antibiotic resistance to our cephalosporins and all of the other penicillins and all of the other antibiotics, that it's an induced resistance there. Glyphosate was promoted as being very safe. It's all the safety studies that have been conducted show that it's a carcinogen, and it causes kidney damage, liver damage, all of these others, and reproductive toxicity, as well as the gender dysphoria. The legacy now that we have from glyphosate is we have sick soils. We have a tremendous drag on our production efficiency. On that study with the soggy sauerkraut, when we went out with the lactobacillus, the raw sauerkraut juice at 15 gallons per acre, and then planted corn the next year, gave it 6 months, we had about 80% of the glyphosate was completely decomposed out of the soil. And we planted corn the next year. We had an 11.5 bushel grain increase on the corn, where we'd cleaned out or degraded the glyphosate, 2.5 ton more silage corn without doing anything except getting rid of some of the glyphosate that was in the soil. So we have a tremendous drag on our actual production efficiency because we have all of this toxin sitting in the soil that is tying up the minerals. We also had an increase in manganese, zinc, and copper when we got rid of the glyphosate by desorbing or breaking that chelation that it was tying it up in that. So you can see we were told that it's only going to inhibit the EPSPS enzyme, but you can see the minerals that are the cofactors all through the whole shikimate secondary metabolism are all tied up and you shut the whole system down. So that it's not just here, but it's actually 291 enzymes that glyphosate inhibits. So it's a major physiological disruption that takes place. You can see this is how 1/4 of a billion pounds goes out for agriculture, and 1/4 of a billion goes out for forestry, parks and recreation, and utilities. So about 500 million pounds of glyphosate indiscriminately spread throughout the environment on that. You say, well, they advertise it and say, well, there's no residual activity of glyphosate. And that's true. It chelates with the minerals very quickly, but it ties them up. This is a field in Georgia with pumpkins, and you can see the previous year's corn rows went perpendicular to the pumpkin rows, and you can see every row of corn because your iron and manganese especially and zinc are all tied up with the glyphosate, as well as your calcium and magnesium. Has a long persistence level, 22 and a half years half-life in a silt loam soil and forever in a clay soil. So unless you do some remediation. This is an area where the farmer 4 years before had just cleaned out his nozzles at the end of the spray program. 4 years later, it's still a sterile, dead area in that production. You say, how much can we tolerate? Well, no one's really been able to do the studies that determine the safety. These are the levels that the EPA says are safe, yet what the studies show is that at levels of 1 part per trillion, or 1 drop in an Olympic swimming pool, inhibits the endocrine hormone system. So that these levels are up to 4,000 times the clinically known toxicity levels for glyphosate. And you say, well, how come it's twice as toxic in soybean seed and canola oil as it is in the other seed oils? You can have twice as much in your other oil seeds than you can have with soybean. So that what makes it so much more toxic? You can look at the spices, and you can look at the sugar cane versus the beet sugar differences, and you say, what's the difference in toxicity? Where's the data? And there is no data. The EPA and FDA both put a little disclaimer on when they increased the levels here and said, we don't do any internal testing. We rely solely on the company's statements that these levels are toxic, or are safe. And the reason why they went to them to start with is these are the levels that they were finding in the commercial product, and said we can't sell our crops because the levels are over the maximum permissible, and we have to raise the level of tolerance in order to have safe product to sell. Well, there's nothing involved in that safety. That it's just that's the levels that that they were finding. You look at levels in water are 700 parts per billion tolerant. In Europe, the level is 3 parts per billion. So you can see how much higher our levels are, how much greater exposure. Just here's where you'll find it. You'll find it here, in all of these areas. And this is the saga of the soggy sauerkraut. Again, the analysis of fertility levels, nutrient levels were all balanced with what was in the manure versus, and the to balance with the conventional inorganic fertilizers, but the difference was the glyphosate that was in them. Again, it caused $1 million loss in the sauerkraut. The other interesting thing, when the company thought that it was in the fermentation process, and the only difference in the fermentation process was that they used sea salt for the organic, and they used conventional mine salt, Redmond salt, and that for the conventional sauerkraut. So we did an analysis on the two. The Sea salt is San Francisco Bay water that is evaporated, and then they wash it with brine 3 or 4 times to get rid of the drugs and the other materials. The only difference in those two, they're both 99.6 or 99.8% sodium chloride, all food grade. The only difference was the organic sea salt had 200 parts per million inorganic insoluble material, and there was only 13 in the mine. Well, you can guess what the insoluble products are in that coming out of San Francisco Bay. But nothing that would affect the texture of the sauerkraut from a fermentation or a loss standpoint. Again, it's toxic to the beneficial organisms. It's a stimulus to the pathogens, so that it increases the virulence and pathogenic activity, so that we see not just the loss from the diseases that these organisms cause, but also the increase in toxin containment in the product that's produced. As a consequence then, we have over 40 plant diseases that are, we call them re-emerging diseases, controlled through our management efforts at one point in time, that are now re-emerging and threatening the survivability of much of our agriculture. And you look at that epidemiological chart there, plot. This is sudden death syndrome on soybeans. Costs us $1 billion a year in lost soybean production. But you see green islands around all the power poles a half mile down this field. You say, how come these aren't dead like the ones over here are? Well, these didn't get sprayed with the glyphosate because the farmer didn't want to hang up his boom on his sprayer on one of those poles. And so he moved out a little bit. Soybeans are still capturing the sun's energy and storing it as sugar and protein through photosynthesis around the pole. But the others have all been defoliated and killed from the glyphosate tying up the magnesium and manganese on it, as you see up here. And XB Yang, with all of our studies for almost 15 years, looking for a toxin, XB Yang found that at Iowa State, that if you just add a little manganese and magnesium seed treatment, that you controlled sudden death syndrome by compensating for those minerals that were tied up by the glyphosate from the GMO plants. Again, food and feed safety concerns with glyphosate. You have that reduced nutrient density, so that we have a lot of mineral deficiencies that also predispose us to a lot of our diseases. And the increased levels of toxic products I've mentioned, but also a lot of other effects, because you're disrupting the entire ecology of the production system. This is, you saw those levels that I had for parts per million of glyphosate permitted, and yet these are some of the clinical studies as far as the actual toxicity to many of the systems. So you have Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, and in fact, a whole series. I'll get those in a minute. But again, this is on poultry. You'll find the same thing, Dana Stanley and others showing it with humans, that if you can reestablish your beneficial organisms, that you change the whole biology. A lot of our disease resistance and function starts in the gut on it. Clostridium is really increased because you take out all of the beneficials that keep it under control. Some research of Monica Kruger in Germany are hoping to get her over for some seminars here in December. But what happens is that in the normal stomach or normal rumen, you have the Enterococcus species that are toxic antibiotic against the botulism, Clostridium botulinum, and so there's no bot neurotoxins produced. At 1/10 of a part per million glyphosate in the feed, you knock out all of those beneficial organisms that are no longer there, and then you have the Clostridium botulinum thrives in that environment because there's no competition. You have all 5 of the bot neurotoxins that have been isolated from those tissues there, and eventually the cow just dies. It's chronic botulism. It's an accumulative toxin. In humans, we call it chronic fatigue syndrome. Usually not fatal, but it's just makes you wish that you were dead. And children's celiac, bad enough that it required hospitalization. Just the epidemiological plot that you have there. You can see with the introduction of the GMO canola and the epidemiological plot with the increase in that problem. You'll find people that will go over to Europe and they can eat the bread and everything over there fine, and they come back home and get the stomach cramps and the other problems with gluten intolerance. And it's oftentimes not gluten intolerance, it's glyphosate toxicity. All of these conditions track the same epidemiological pattern as the celiac with the children there. So it's not just 1 or 2 diseases that you see that increase in, but it's all of these that we're seeing the increase in reaching epidemiological catastrophe following that same situation. This is Nancy Swanson's study where she just matched the CDC data with the USDA data on glyphosate, and you see that correlation. When I served on the Surgeon General's Global Epidemiology or Quadripartite Epidemiology Committee, when we would see this kind of situation for one disease, we would ask, what's changed? And then we would assemble, if we couldn't rule that out as being just correlation or not related to causation, we would not pursue it. But if it looked like there was anything causative related there, as the correlation would indicate, because these are all 0.9 and above correlation coefficients, we would assemble a scientific panel. In fact, I chaired the USDA National Disease Response Program, and we would assemble the scientific panel to say, okay, what is this correlation or is it causation? And if it's causation, how do we change it? What's the vulnerability and the risk factors? None of that's done in relationship to glyphosate. Ted Dutemeyer's liver study on his animals, where he tests the liver for glyphosate levels, and you can see with each 5% increase in, or 5 parts per billion increase in glyphosate, you'll see a further increase in severity of liver toxicity and damage and birth defects. This situation we got involved with in Central America and Guatemala, 1/4 of all of the sugarcane workers will die from end-stage kidney failure. That's had 20,000 in just Panama and Nicaragua on it. They were using glyphosate as a ripening agent on sugar cane, just like they do for wheat and barley and oats and beans and chickpea and everything else in North America. And what we did then to get away from that is we showed them if they would just manage their nutrition and developed a very simple nutritional program with about 1 kilogram of soluble boron, a couple of 100 milligrams of manganese, and a couple of 100 milligrams of molybdenum, that we could get 8% more harvested sugar without the lethal effects of having the glyphosate there. So that we were able to substitute, get that over, and then you see a big benefit in the ratoon crops, the subsequent crops coming along, because we haven't damaged that plant by the systemic activity of the glyphosate adequate.
I watched them harvesting that this year, and they don't use machinery. They do it manually.
Yeah.
And so it's no wonder it's so high.
And in fact, that's one of the questions we asked, well, where are they getting the toxicity? Where are they getting the glyphosate? Because it's sprayed on 4 or 5 weeks before you harvest, and then they burn the cane to get rid of all of the residue, and also the other thing that I like better was it also gets rid of the snakes. But they burn it, so how are they getting the glyphosate toxicity? And it's when they're out there harvesting, they're sweating, it's hot, and they'll cut a little chunk off the bottom of the stem that they're harvesting and put it in their mouth as a sugar source, and also just to have something else to do. And that's where your glyphosate accumulates. That's where your minerals are. And it chelates those minerals, and it's stored there. Jasmanian in Sri Lanka showed the same thing. In fact, on his paper, he got the AAAS award for best paper of the scientific accomplishment of the year 2 or 3 years ago on it, by showing that with the rice workers, which are having the same problem with end-stage kidney failure that our sugarcane workers were, that it was all hand harvested and had high minerals in the water that they were drinking and plugging up the kidney. And so with the mineral approach, we not only reduce the toxicity of the process, but also increase the harvestable yield and benefit to the rest of the crops.
So this was from 2009, and we're having 1 in 4 of the workers die in South Florida. So from then to now, are they making any changes? Do the workers know this?
My ears are...
Are they making the changes? So the
Yes.
workers know this?
Yes, they're very receptive to it, because if you think of that 17 to 40-year-old age group being removed from your society, it's a tremendous demographic impact for them.
But do they know the reason why?
Yes, the reason's been very well researched and very clear.
It's been communicated.
The what?
Has it been communicated?
Yes. So,
Yes, he mentioned magnesium, boron, and what was the other one as the minerals?
on the ripening
No, the magnesium, boron, and something else.
molybdenum and
How do you spell?
molybdenum and manganese.
How do you spell?
molybdenum.
Thank you.
I think Laura will correct me, or Kathy will. She'll correct me if I made a mistake there.
Sounds right.
Kathy edits all of my papers. Look at the autism challenge that we have here. In 2007, it was 1 in 150 kids. 1 in 100 kids diagnosed in 2009. 1 in 50 diagnosed on 2013. And it's anticipated that 1 in 2 by 2035, and we currently can't manage the actual physical requirement to meet the medical needs of our children on the ADHD spectrum now. What are we going to do?
So can you tell them about the cure for autism that you mentioned? The fecal transplants?
Oh, fecal transplants in Germany have about a 95% success rate. The problem is that you have to have a fecal bank, because you can also have parasites transferred and some other problems, but it's a matter of, just like most of our medical procedures, that you take the precautions and you clean up the system, and then you can use those techniques. Yes, the fecal transplant, not only for autism, severe autism cases, about a 95%. For celiac, I worked with a fellow in Guatemala that was skinny as a bone and couldn't hardly walk in a room with any gluten product. He got a fecal transplant. Actually, his wife turned out to be a compatible donor, and he said in 3 days he could eat anything he wanted. For I think the only disease that I'm aware of that is medically approved is Clostridium difficile diarrhea, and that's a life and death situation. If you are resistant to all the antibiotics, that's your only solution there, and that's, again, 95% or so success cure on that.
So what body part is switched out on a fecal transplant?
The feces.
That's what it sounded like. I just wanted
Yeah.
to make sure.
And that's why this going from feed to feces to fertilizer to crop is so interesting on how persistent that product is as an antibiotic and a mineral chelator through all of that process. Even composting has only a limited effect in degrading it, unless you also add the lactobacillus plantarum and several other organisms in that compost. They're natural organisms for sauerkraut. I don't know of anybody that uses inoculum. They just, the organisms are there. But when you get into the feed and into those things, then it's not there. And that. No, it's like it sounds. I had a situation just south of here, away about 20, 30 miles, where they had difficile diarrhea outbreak in a nursing home. Very critical. Six of the people were essentially headed to the mortuary because of the severity, and none of them responded to the antibiotics that were being used. The doctor told me, he said, the only thing I can go with from here is a fecal transplant, but I need your permission. 5 of them said, it doesn't sound very good to me. 1 of them said, I'm desperate. She's the only survivor. probably worn out my welcome. I can just show you some of that on the, well, fertility and that. But if you have a question, let's take it.
Is there a register anywhere? We own range rights, or we pay for range rights in Idaho, and I was there, and there was a helicopter that had a sprayer on it, and I asked about it, and they said that they are now spraying the ranges, BLM. Do we know what they're spraying with, and is there somewhere we can find and what the schedule is?
You can get it on Freedom of Information Act,
Okay,
and I'd encourage you to do that.
okay.
But probably, I don't know what percentage, but a major percentage of our forests now are sprayed with glyphosate. And half of that, about 250 million pounds, goes out on forestry and that, because they want the conifer species, not the hardwood. And the conifers are more tolerant of it, and it gets rid of the browse, especially in a clear-cut situation. But it also spreads through that whole system, and all the villages and all the people that might be out there, the animals. This last spring, Judy Hoy, a wildlife biologist, said that entire herds of deer and elk in Washington, Idaho, and Montana were still running together because they had grazed on the stubble from lentils and chickpea and wheat and barley that had been sprayed with glyphosate as a desiccant, and they were all infernal. None of them were with a young one.
If you were to do a blood test, is there a specific one that you would ask for to check all these chemicals, or?
Well, there's a standard 200 chemical test, but they don't test for glyphosate. And that's the elephant in the room for most of these. Glyphosate, glufosinate, and chlorpyrifos are the primary high risk, high toxic, and high exposure levels. But HRI Laboratories at Fairfield, Iowa, will do the 200 test, and usually the one that shows up of much significance is usually chlorpyrifos, and that it does test for it. But it'll also do the glyphosate. It'll be a separate test. Glyphosate's a hard compound to test for because it's a strong chelator, so that you have to extract it and break that chelation for it to run the test on it. So it's a little more expensive in humans. I don't know, Lori, what you recommend, but what?
About $119 for a urine test with Great Plain Labs or HRI. I can give you the info.
But the urine will give you about a month's test, or 2 or 3 weeks, possibly exposure. If it's pretty consistent, your hair test will give you a longer exposure.
So if you're testing your water, your surface water, is that going to be a problem to discover the chemicals?
Yes.
Okay. So they could come back and say it's
if
fine.
you're south of this area and some of these limestone quarries and that type of soil, you're going to want to check for boron, for arsenic, or those will be two of the big toxin entities, and they're both normal. I mean, just part of the geology on it. But.
Sorry, I have one more question. So this bioengineering that they're talking about, how wonderful it is. What makes it different than GMO? I mean, to me, it's still messing with it.
It's a political term.
Okay, that's what I wondered.
And rather than, if you read on on the bag, and it says bioengineered product, it's genetically engineered. It's just that the companies argued that we've been given a bum rap and wanted another name, and so they came up with bioengineering.
So the chemtrails that we see overhead all the time, are they spraying the glyphosate?
No,
They're not.
but they're using aluminum and cadmium and
What are they spraying?
toxic levels
And that is for what purpose?
to reflect the sun or to precipitate moisture. Actually, silver iodide and a couple other things are used for cloud seeding, but
I'm assuming that's not good for us.
not at all.
So I read in an article about vaccines that they lowered the mercury but upped the aluminum, which magnified the mercury. So if they're spraying us with aluminum, all our vaccines in our bodies are going to be magnified?
There are 55 compounds that are known in the vaccines, in addition to the spike protein genetics and whatnot. We're in a toxic environment, and which makes it really critical that you have a good diet, a clean diet, and a balanced diet. Laurie can help you in all of those. But the body's pretty remarkable as far as what it can do, but we can also overload it, and that's what we're doing. Someone asked me to make sure I covered fertility, and Newsweek said, "Who's killing America's sperm?" Well, in France, they've had a 32% drop in viable sperm concentration since the 90s. They steadily dropped 2% per year. Proportion of normally farmed sperm also declined by about a third. Dropped 30% in the last 5 years. So that we're an endangered species, literally. 1.3 children per family is not replacement, about half replacement, 2.3 is replacement.
Thank you. In case you didn't know, I just ordered the Pfizer papers. They released the trial, and their whole focus was to reduce the population, so they concentrated on the reproductive systems, and they do not know if the children of parents who have been vaccinated will be able to reproduce.
Yeah. We're already at 40% of the population of childbearing age that they calculate aren't going to be able to have children.
Yep.
So we're already down. This is a gynecologist in Bali shared these with me, but this is what they're finding on the imported genetically engineered soybean tofu versus the normal diet, and you see the effect on the placenta. You'll see this hemorrhagic effect in in cattle and poultry and humans. Also, as a result of glyphosate exposure. You see the tragedy in Yakima Valley with when they had the invasive weed species, and EPA says it's perfectly safe to dump glyphosate in the water up to 700 parts per billion. And 2008, they had the invasive species that were in the water, so they started dumping glyphosate in. 2 articles that covered it on glyphosate brain damaged babies in Yakima Valley. They had the 3 rivers going through Hamilton, Yakima, and Benton counties. are all treated, and all of them then a year or two later all had massive increase in babies' anencephaly, where the brain doesn't develop. If you got to hold your baby, it was for 24 hours or so, but most of them were stillborn in that series. They wouldn't let them do any glyphosate testing because they said, we know it's there, there's no need to test for it, but it's also safe because we're below the 700 parts per billion.
Is this Yakima in the United States?
Yeah.
This is Washington.
Yeah, Yakima, Washington.
And as soon as the newspaper covered it, they got pulled.
Yeah.
They
They said it violates the Medical Privacy Act to mention it. Again, inflammatory bowel disease, it just really changes your gut microbiota. Glyphosate diarrhea, again, I've mentioned it in a situation just south, but especially for older people. And so I pay attention to some of these things, because one of these days maybe I'll make it. But incidences increased 500% in 7 years. That was in 2015. So you see the dramatic change in the entire ecology. It's not just one little thing that you can point to and say has changed. It's kind of like Ryan Cole says, you know, how do we account for all the excess deaths that we have? It's not just one thing, it's the whole system then.
So you
The
said,
endocrine hormone disruption, cleft palate, because glyphosate blocks a tubal closure.
so it's glyphosate, you said, is synergistic with the COVID vaccine?
Yes,
Increases.
much more serious. This work of Jeremy Sheffers in Minnesota, shared a conference with him on it, and he was trying to figure out why so many of the calves were born stillborn are with arthritis like knobby joints and overbite or underbite and that. And he found that all of the defarmed calves were extremely deficient in manganese. The normal ones were also deficient, as you see, 1.2 part per million versus the normal range of 1.75. But 63% of those with a normal phenotype were still very deficient in manganese. And then he analyzed the feed, and these feed levels, his top levels over here for shell corn and corn silage and hay and mixed haylage are all what we used to think of as being just average. Now those are the maximum levels that he's finding because of the chelation and mobilization of the glyphosate. Again, the other elements in the environment are affected, your colony collapse and that. Foul brood, Amos has shown that the effect here is from the GMO honey crops, from the glyphosate, antibiotic activity against the lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, and the honey crop that the bee has to have for metabolism. You look at the eutrophication, and University of Wisconsin scientists have shown that glyphosate contributes 1/3 pound of phosphorus pollution per year for every acre in the watershed of the lake. And it's not phosphorus per se, it's glyphosate. Glyphosate is just the amino acid glycine and phosphite. And they're getting the glyphosate coming right through the filter strips because they've already chelated and tied up all that they can with the minerals in that filter strip, so it's going right out into the lake. Well, the blue-green algae for eutrophication are resistant to glyphosate, but you kill off all the other competitors, that are there. So again, it's far-reaching impact of glyphosate in the environment to stop it. Prevention's our first line of defense. That we need is a ban and to are very seriously restrict its usage, and then monitoring its presence all through the process there, so that if we look at the 5 R's of correction, you have to recognize the problem, and so far most people are saying it's not a problem because EPA has levels so high that you're always going to approach that, but be under it for most situations. We can use other tools for weed control, and Lori familiar, and have a new one that's just been registered fairly recently, and that's the Firehawk. That's a contact herbicide and non-glyphosate herbicide there. So there are other tools that are usable. We still have tillage that we can use, cultivation. You don't have to beat the soil to death, but there are some other positive benefits with a little bit of tillage and good weed control. And to look at those 5, we need to remediate for the damage, get the nutrition up for the animals and the crop and our children, restore that microbiome, and we can control it. Get through some of these things. Zeolite is used on it. Chelation and clay entrapment are kind of standards right now, but we can also degrade it fully, and there are biological cocktails that will do this as probiotics, and raw sauerkraut juice is really a very beneficial entity to use that. For years, my research, while I was looking for organisms that would degrade glyphosate in the soil, I wasn't finding anything that would be compatible with the soil microflora and persist, and so I would recommend that our growers would just get out with a couple of 100 pounds of gypsum, calcium sulfate, to tie it up, keep it tied up, and you can see the effects of that. They're on these coffee plants here, as you increase the rate of mineral to chelate and tie up the glyphosate, you saw the growth response. With the degradation of the glyphosate, rather than just tying it up and kicking the can down the road until it really comes back to bite us, you can see that we not only increase the yield potential, here where we use both the Paleo Grow, it's an 8-organism biococktail that degrades glyphosate by all 3 mechanisms. That when we use that and raw sauerkraut juice, we had 10.8 bushel increase in yield without having to put more fertilizer on, because of the release of that that's already tied up by the glyphosate. And our silage, about 2.5 ton per acre. Well, if you've got 500 acres of silage, and 2.5 tons is a pretty good return on your 16 or 17 ounce inoculum source per acre that you're using for degrading it. Regulatory collusion, a serious problem for us. Needs some real cleaning to do. Some of the labs for getting the testing done and that, but remember that you can't see it, taste it, or smell it, but it can slowly kill you and damage. And that, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've gone a little overtime. Lori, thanks for not pulling my shirt tail real hard or that, but I appreciate the work that many are doing to try and correct the situation. And it's a matter of trying to get through the big dollars that are politically sensitive or politically insensitive in that. So thanks.
So, I'd like to just kind of add to what Dr. Huber was saying. Actually, I'm doing a talk next Monday at the Heber Police Station on ADD, the brain-gut connection. So these are just some stats. Dr. Huber showed some ADD slides. The work of Dr. Stephanie Senev shows that glyphosate is water soluble, meaning that it can cross the cell membrane. I just want to read you some stats. 1 in 2 adults will now be diagnosed with a mental disorder in their lifetime. 1 in 25 Americans live with a serious emotional brain health issue. 1 in 5 children currently or at some point will be diagnosed with a mental illness. In 2006, antidepressants soared to over $1.5 billion. Mental health disorders now annually are over $2.5 trillion. Expected to increase to over $6 trillion by 2030. Most Americans are living in significant stress and uncertainty, which has increased mental health disorders. Street drugs like ketamine are on the rise, opiates, kratom, and alcohol. We are living in a world not only with glyphosate, but over 85,000 plus chemicals in the air we breathe, the food we eat, and the water we drink. Yet families do not know about these chemicals. So we have recorded tonight's presentation with Dr. Don Huber. If you would like a recording, you can get a hold of Renee Green, who was really instrumental in putting this together, so thank you. If anybody is interested in doing urine tests on glyphosate, I'd be happy to help somebody. My website is stopsprayingglyphosate.com. It's kind of how I met Dr. Huber. I am a health lawyer against and trying to educate families on the dangers of herbicides. So if you could share this presentation, share our contacts, we would greatly appreciate it. But Dr. Huber, thank you from the bottom of all of our hearts for being generous. You educate all over the world, and it's an honor to have you here in American Fort this evening. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Jim for getting that PowerPoint to work. You wouldn't have had any of the pictures if it hadn't have been for that. So thanks. You're welcome. Thanks to all of you for the work you do.
Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children play? Bring them fields of green and gold, let their laughter echo clear. In a world so tightly wound, where can our children